What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. Today we're going to be doing a video on what many always ask, whether it's on YouTube or it's on Instagram. Well, it's really whenever somebody sees a picture of the tip ditch coupe that's sitting behind me right here, they ask me, well, is it on air? Is it on bags? And the simple answer is yes. This car is sitting on Ride Tech's Cool Wave, Cool Ride, whatever it is, air bag, air spring, whatever you want to call it, air system. Now, right off the bat, guys, I'm going to tell you, you can no longer get this kit for your Fox. Unfortunately, Ride Tech uses, I'm not sure if they still use or not, Firestone bags. Firestone is probably one of the largest leading suppliers for air bag suspension. You will see it on transport trucks. You will see it on many other applications out there. And unfortunately, Firestone discontinued the bags that Ride Tech was using for the rear of a Fox body. Now, I've done a little bit of preliminary research, not a whole ton, because it would most likely require me to buy 3 or 4 sets of bags. I do believe there should be a bag that could be cross-referenced, that could be used in the rear. Now, with that said, who wants to reinvent the wheel? Because I would think Ride Tech would have thought of looking for another successor or another bag that they could have used for this kit, but they opted not to. Instead, now Ride Tech has their shock wave kit, and we'll talk about these two here in a minute. But this kit here, it's a traditional bag. It's that old school rubber bag that you've seen time and time again, that in your mind most of you would think, oh man, that's really bouncy, that's not going to ride nice, that's for transport trucks and not for cars, or whatever the excuse in your head might be. I will tell you, and Castle Customs will tell you, and Louis Savello will tell you, and anybody who I have let drive this car or who has rode in this car will be able to tell you that this car rides better than factory, or than it ever would have coming off the showroom floor with air suspension. And that is, just for the disclaimer for anybody who might say it, that's not riding at stock ride height. If you're riding at stock ride height on air ride, you're pretty much on a cloud. If you ride 2 inches below stock ride height, I would say you're probably riding like you were stock, but you're riding 2 inches lower. It's just the technology, getting the air pressures correct plays such an important role in this. That is why you just can't take a random bag. And I think back in the day when people were thinking about, you know, all the tuner cars that were running air cylinders and all these different things, that's not the case here. You know, Ride Tech's product, the bags that they used, which technically were Firestone bags, so you can call it Firestone Air Ride if you want, with Ride Tech branded controls. Now, the other important thing with a bag setup, pretend your bags are like your coil springs. I'm gonna pop the wheels off on the driver's side. I'm gonna show you what the bags look like, but that's what it is. The bag, or the air spring, goes in the spot of where your coil spring would typically be. There's some mounts that you got to install in there, but that's pretty much what it is. Versus the new shockwave kits, they are like a coilover. So you have your shock and or strut in the middle with a bag around the top, and that is kind of the new age technology, the new design, which I do not have. I have not ridden in a fox body that has it, so I cannot attest to the quality or how it rides over this. I just wanted to get into details for everybody that was asking what the setup is on this car. So first things first, let's look in the trunk here. Now, I have told you guys before, I am ashamed of my trunk. We have wires everywhere for the stereo and everything else. I'm going to grab a light, and you guys are actually going to be able to see firsthand on how bad this situation is. This is an amplifier for stereo. This is crossovers for stereo. This is air ride stuff. So you can see here, these are nylon lines. So these are not hard lines. These are flexible. They are super easy to route. Of course, you want to make sure that you do not have them anywhere near, sharp edges that could rub or cut through the nylon, or something mechanical that could, maybe your diff, trying to run them over your diff and a bump stop, and then you end up pinching the line or anything like that. So you want to be cautious of where you run all your air lines. You have all your fittings. These are all quick connect, by the way. So you just you can push and release super, super easy. Here's all the solenoids. So these guys are what is letting the air go into the bags or releasing air out of the bags. So very basic. Air tank holds air. Air comes out of the tank into the distribution block here, and the solenoids allow the air to go where it needs to. And then you have a line that's going to each bag. So there's two ways that this can be done. You can see that there's 8 solenoids here. That means 4 solenoids to let air in on each corner, 4 solenoids to let air out on each corner. This could actually be just 4 solenoids if you just wanted to control front versus rear. So when you guys hear that term, front, back, side to side, well, front, back, side to side means that you have 4 switches or 4 controls that you can control each corner individually. Versus some kits, you could say, I only want the rear to go up and down off a switch, and I only want the front to go up and down off a switch. You cannot do all 4 corners because you do need to balance your air, because the amount of pressure that you need in the rear is different than the pressure that you're going to need in the front. Just think of your spring rates. Spring rates for fox bodies range from 500 to 1,000 pounds per inch in the front. And in the rear, you'd be like 250 to 400 in most cases, right? So same thing with the airbags. You need to be able to control how much pressure is in the back. Just to give you an idea, I usually run about 20 pounds of pressure in the back and about 80 pounds in the front, right? So you're talking, what's that, a 4-to-1 split between your pressure front to back. Now, if we look over here, we have the pump, which is, they have it branded Ride Tech. Oh, do I not have a Viair pump? I thought they used Viair. It's a Thomas. I don't know how this, stacks up against a Viair. Traditionally, you'll see Viair pumps. You'll see compressor, sorry. In most cases, you'll see dual Viair compressors, so that way you can fill your tank faster. If you guys are going to be doing lots of playing around and up and down, I would recommend that you have 2 compressors, maybe even a larger tank. If you guys just need to be able to adjust your ride height for when you're parking and you're driving, this will suffice and is pretty much all you need. Other than that, we have a pressure sensor here that automatically detects when the tank is running low. When the tank is running low, it will kick the compressor on and fill the tank for you. One thing that you want to note, of course, you want to have a relay in for the compressor. You want to make sure there's a fuse on it. And I would personally recommend direct wiring it to power, so that way if your ignition is off, your compressor can still turn on and fill your air tank up, especially if for whatever reason you just want to show somebody how it works. You don't have to worry about turning your key on. You can put the car up and the compressor is automatically going to kick on. So let's go to the inside of the car. I'm going to show you guys the switches and the controls the way that I have them. There's tons of air management options out there. There's digital screens. There are people that have their controls wired through PlayStation controllers. There are Bluetooth connectivity things that you can like completely manage how your car is sitting from your phone. And it's pretty crazy. In fact, when it comes down to cost, the bags and the hardware and everything really aren't the expensive part. It's actually getting your air management down being the expensive part. Buying your compressor, buying your solenoids, buying the management that's actually going to control and tell the solenoid go up, go down. Now, a solenoid is really easy. It's activated by 12 volts. And you just say open or close. It doesn't get more simple than that. That's why you sometimes see the old rat rod or old hot rodder guys. They have like a big switch box that they probably wired themselves and created themselves. And you can 100% do that. And in fact, what I have isn't too far off from that. It's what RideTech's, I guess, entry-level analog setup would be. Now, I wanted something where things were hidden, and I have everything hiding right here in the factory armrest. So this is kind of just the switch plate, and I have it pressure fit in here, nothing fancy. There are 4 air lines that are running to these gauges, so 2 for this gauge and 2 for that. As you can see, there's 2 needles on each side. So white represents the right side, orange represents the left side. So you have 2 switches here, right, left, and one is our rear and the other is the front. So if I do this, right, we just raised up our left rear, right? So go up, go down. So you got to kind of play with this and know how to achieve what you want. Now we got the front up. So we can see now, that says about 100 in the front, about 40 in the rear. And like I said, I usually like to run about 20 in the rear and 80 in the front. This is a pretty nice ride height here. So if you weren't 100% sure of what the roads were that you were on, this would probably be a pretty safe bet. And we can go even higher, in fact, so that it makes our life even easier to slide the jack underneath. So we can go ahead, call it 4x4 or tow mode. All right, there we go. It'll actually go even higher, but this is more than good enough for us to be able to get the jack underneath the car. So I'm going to do that now. We'll pull the front off. We'll go over the airbag in the front. And then I'll pull the rear off and we'll go over that bag in the rear. Alright guys, I had to wipe down the inside of the wheel well here a little bit. This car gets driven. It does. Sometimes I even get caught in the rain, which I did. So things had a bunch of water spots and a little bit of road grime and debris up in there. So I gave it a quick little wipe down before I show you guys the bag setup in here. So one thing that you're going to notice, SSBC big brake kit, and I can't say enough about this. I got this before. The company ended up getting, I guess, transitioned. I don't know what the story is, don't know what happened, but they're still making products. I don't know what the price point is or anything else, but I am really, really happy. And I have the front and the rear kit on the car. And this isn't like, I'm not trying to be sponsored or have a plug or anything like that for them. I'm just genuinely sharing my feedback about this brake kit with you guys, as hey, they are American made. So peeking in here, you're going to notice I actually have factory struts still. That's right, these are the factory Motocraft made in Japan. struts that came on the car, 35,000 original kilometers, and same with the sway bar and the end links and everything else. Nothing has been changed other than the brakes and where the coil spring sits. So probably wondering, well, how does the bag mount? So you can see here's the bag, double bubble, kind of nice curvy body here, right? Then there's a hat on the top, which you can see that nut in between the K-member and the frame rail, right underneath that brake line. And it's pretty much sandwiched in there, but it does fit. And that is how the top mounts. And on the bottom, there's actually a plate down here. And the plate bolts to the back side of the control arm and comes all the way over to the front here. And there's actually a cutout, a little half moon that allows your bushing for the sway bar end link to still bolt down and do its thing. So that's how the bottom part of the bag is mounted. And the airline is actually coming right here. So this is the airline here. You can see there's a little bit of split wire loom just to make sure that the line won't rub and cut on this part of the K-member. And then it passes through this hat and ultimately goes into the bag. And I believe that's a 90-degree fitting underneath the hat, which holds it in there. So that is the front Cool Wave, Cool Ride, I forget what it's called, front bag. Now these Firestone still sells. We can still get the fronts. If any of you guys are interested, I forget, I do have the part number somewhere, but these still exist. So pretty straightforward, right? Now, if you are thinking, okay, well, what about the Shockwave, the coil over or bag over strut design? So imagine like you had a coil over setup in here. You would have Ride Tech's strut with an airbag that's somewhere hiding up in here, and that airbag would control the air, which would be your ride height, and then you would have all of your rebound and everything else, which would be controlled through the strut. Now, what ultimately that does, it's going to leave a big hole down where your traditional coil spring would be, and you would have the big factory control arm. So if you were going to go with the Shockwave kit, I would recommend, you'd almost want to do a tubular K-member with tubular control arms just to clean up the look of everything if that was the way that you were going. This way is extremely factory looking. When you look in here, you wouldn't think anything else. In reality, there's just a double bubble bag where your factory coil spring would be. So let's move on to the rear. So welcome to the rear suspension setup of the car. I gave a sneak peek of this in my video when I was doing the wheel swap with the 18-inch Oz Velas. And again, extremely simple. And same thing, got SSBC back here. And when you get the kit, here are the bags that I was talking about that are no longer made. So very simple, top hat here, bolts up through this hole here. If you guys have ever done the adjustable spring perches in the rear, whether Raceland, SVE, any of those introductory coil over kits that would come out for the foxbody, that's where you would mount the spring perch, is up through the top part here, as that's normally where your top of your spring would sit. And then similarly, you go straight through the lower control arm here and you bolt the bottom plate on, airline right here, tuck down through the little bump stop mount here. You can see my bump stop has been cut. And another thing, for anybody who's ready to call me out on it, I do not have quad shocks on this car. And I always say you should run a quad shock, but I am not. And the only reason why I am not is because of the Detch ASG setup here, because this bolts in place of where your quad shock typically is. And I took out the mounts to put this in, and the mounts didn't go back on. In fact, I'm not 100% sure if you can still run it. I would assume you could, because Detch was extremely mindful of being able to retain everything that is factory. So I will be looking into this. Don't worry about that. One other thing that you're going to notice here is the Ride Tech shock in the back. So this came with the kit. They do not provide front struts with this setup with the bags, or at least they did not. They only provided the rear shock. So shocks are pretty generic, guys. This wouldn't be the end of the world if you didn't have these. You could do any upgraded shock in the rear, or even a really good factory rear shock would most likely suffice. So there is the rear setup, and that pretty much concludes what an airbag Ride Tech air ride suspension consists of for a foxbody. So I need to insert this portion into the video because I feel like it's really important. When we're talking about going low with fox bodies, getting the fronts down is easy. Whether it's a shorter spring, a coilover that's cranked down further, an airbag, whatever it might be, you can get the front of a Fox to pretty much like eat the wheel up into the inner fender. The rear is always a challenge. And I could probably do a video just on the rear alone, because it is not easy to get the rear of a Fox down, because there's so many contributing elements that restrict you from being able to go down low. And the reason why I'm saying this is that if we look at the Kelly Coupe right here, that is probably as low as a Fox on air ride would go in the rear if you were to just bolt the kit in. And that would be it. And you would think, well, I got air ride. Why isn't it tucking that wheel all the way in to the rear quarter lip? Well, that's because there's limiting factors that I was talking about earlier. There's things like bump stops. There's things like the way that the perches and the mounts are designed, and a whole array of other things. Now, those arrays of other things usually relate to safety. And the reason being is that if you were to lose air in the back bag, whether a line gets cut, you blow out in one of the bags or whatever else, you're going to want the suspension to fall onto the bump stops so that you can pull over to the side of the road safely and not have to worry about potentially wrecking your car. There's ways around it. Now that I'm talking about it, it is a safety thing at the end of the day, so I don't know if I want to show people how to circumvent that, but there are ways. It's not just about shaving your bump stops, because you've got a pinion snubber and then you've got brackets that you would have to essentially play with in order to get past the point of where the diff would be limited, where it would stop if there was no suspension left. And that ultimately comes down to your shocks. So you want to make sure you have a really good set of shocks, because the next thing, whether your pinion hits the bottom of the floorboard, that's going to be one limiting factor, or the ultimate limiting factor. But ultimately, you're going to want something. You're going to want something to bump stop, something to hit, and you want to make sure that your wheel and tire is able to go up into the wheel well properly. And that is the most important part of that. If your wheel and tire won't go up into the wheel well properly, and you blow something out and your rear quarter panel lands right on the top of your tire, you're going to be in for a bad time. So you will notice on all of my cars, I don't do the whole stretch and poke game. All of my cars are in a position that if you lost all suspension, that wheel and tire will be able to go up and it will still be able to turn. And the car that's the most important in is probably this guy right here. If for whatever reason a spring got knocked out of place, or like I said, you lost all your air, you lost everything else, you need to make sure that you can still have your wheel turning safely to the point where you can pull over. So keep that in mind. There's probably a few guys that are interested that want to push the limits and push the boundaries, or wonder, hey, how did you actually get your car to go down lower? Well, I've just given you some of the hints. So there you are. So let's talk about cost for a minute. Is it ultimately worth getting air ride? I would say If your suspension is old, it needs to be replaced anyways, and you're thinking that you want a really nice street cruiser that maybe you want to be low but don't want to potentially risk ruining your front bumper or getting stone chips, unwanted stone chips in your paint, or any of those other things, you want the flexibility, I would say absolutely. You know, kits can range anywhere from 2,500 to the top thousands, because sometimes people get into auto levelers where there's literally little sensors that measure how far the car is off the ground. It will automatically add air, remove air. Maybe you got a fat chick in the car or whatever it might be. It's going to level it out automatically for you to make sure your car is level and riding the way that you want it to be. Or you can keep it on the cheaper side of things the way that I did. Analog gauges, analog switches. Hell, you could build your own and you could go that way. It just really comes down to your bags and your brackets, and it's not rocket science, guys. I showed you on how this stuff is mounted in. Those nylon air lines are literally like dollars. They're cheap. So you got to put some time in, a little bit of effort, and I think that all the benefits outweigh the cons, in my opinion. I've had this kit in the car for the better part of 5 years, probably 10,000 kilometers, maybe a little bit more, and I haven't had any issues. If this car sits like this for, I would say it'd take about a month. I think there is one corner that slightly loses a little bit of air, but make sure that you just Teflon wrap all your fittings. Make sure you check over things. Make sure, you know, when you're driving down the road that you don't see any crazy leaks that are happening. If you're continuously adding air, then you might have a problem. But other than that, for the comfort, for the flexibility, for the cool factor, I would say that it's 100% worth it. So for me personally, when you're a big wheel, low to the ground kind of guy, and you have a car that's as pristine as this one is, you want to mitigate as many chances of something happening as you can. You know, whether you're going over speed bumps or parking curbs or just, again, road debris, driving on the road, and maybe something's there, you want to be able to drive over it, and you don't want to have to worry about getting chips or cracks or God knows what. I'm pretty fortunate with most of my cars because I'm careful, but again, to me, air ride's almost like an insurance policy when I'm driving this car around. So that's my 2 cents. Hopefully it helps you guys. If you guys are interested in air ride, if any of you guys have got the Ride Tech Shockwave kit, by all means, comment below. I'm curious to hear your feedback. Different air management setups out there that you guys are using. You know, my way is one way, and there's so many different options. We got Airlift, you got AccuAir, you got all these other companies out there as well that are making products for these cars and SM95s all the way to the new stuff. So be sure to check them out if you're interested. And Ride Tech also has their new crazy front end suspension setup that can be used with coilovers or with air in the front, and apparently they're releasing something new for the rear in the new year, so I'm very excited to see what they're doing there, and hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on a new setup and be able to showcase that, and we can do a comparison of the old school versus the new school, so stay tuned for that.